Hello. Today we are going to turn 3D printed parts into a functional forklift. How are we going to do it? We're going to use CyberBrick, which is a box of electronics from MakerWorld. These are our 3D printed parts that we have previously printed off. And these are the tools we're going to use to get it done. We have needle nose pliers, an M2.5 drill bit and tap, a flush cutters, and a M1.5 hex bit, a Phillips head bit, a 7/32 drill bit, and some super glue. Okay, we'll get started with the gearbox here. So the first step is putting together a couple of pieces. For one, we start by using this aid, put a little pin in there, and we can make sure that we completely seat this rod in the hole here in the gear shaft. Now what we found out is that it doesn't quite fit in there very well, so what we do is take this M2.5 drill bit here, and if we drill in just a little bit, you don't want to go too far to drill all the way through. If you go all the way through, no big deal, it'll still work. And now we can also put the shaft in the second hole. This one, for whatever reason, wasn't quite as tight, but there we are. Now we can put this gear that we were using earlier, we marry that up with this gear, put it together, just fits in there. It's a bit of a friction fit. There we go. And then we have our motor, which I got ahead of myself and already put the gear on the end of the motor. It does help to just put it on the table and smash it down a little bit to get it in, otherwise it's hard on your hands and your fingers. Going on to step 7, we have our lubricant, and so we can start assembling this motor. So the first thing I do is put the motor in there, and then with the lubricant that comes, I just put a little dot right on the end of the gear, and as the gear turns, we'll see that it will cake around the rest. This gear actually should go in first, it looks like. So take that back out, put that gear in first, then we will put in the motor, then we take the larger gear and slide it in. And while these two gears are exposed, we'll take this grease again and just put a little dot, I know it's hard to see, wherever gears exist, just to make sure these are lubricated. This is a very important step, don't skip it, otherwise you'll end up having a seized motor. Okay, then we take the smaller gear and put it in there next. There we go. And then lastly is this taller gear, which goes on the last remaining shaft. And then we can just, again, put a little bit of grease right between the gears. That will work its way around as soon as we turn on the motor. Now we're going to go ahead and put the cover on here. So it fits pretty snug. And then lastly, we take a couple of screws and seal that all together. We don't have to tap these holes with our M2.5 tap. The designer of this model did a very good job of to where we can actually just use, in most cases, the screws directly into the holes. There are only a couple of spots where I found it useful to tap, and we'll get to that here in a second. Just tighten it, finger tight. We now have 2 gearboxes complete. So moving on to the next step, which is the vehicle body. So starting with the chassis here, we'll go ahead and put our 2 gearboxes in. And what I find is that if you over drilled, like I said, that center shaft, it's blocked by this center support in here, so no big deal. Just find and seat these in here nicely. Again, the developer of this model did such a good job that the tolerances are just about perfect. Can get that settled in there. There we go. On to step 11, we will take our top part of the chassis, and the idea is to route the wires for those two motors out through the sides here so they can just come out to the top. And then we put a bolt right down in the middle, and that's going to make sure that we have the top attached to the bottom. Next step are the tires. Okay, get these over here. These are really cool. Each tire comes with a hubcap and wheel. They're slightly different styles. One, you'll notice the back of one has a large hole in it and the other one has a small hole in it. The small hole is going to go on our gear shaft, and then the one with this larger hole is going to go on the front. Now those get attached with screws. So if we take a screw here and we take the one with the larger hole, we can put that screw through there, and we go ahead and tighten that onto that portion. So you tighten it up, and if you tighten it up too much, the wheels won't be able to turn. So the idea is to back it off. They say about a half to one turn. You want it backed off just enough to where the wheel doesn't wobble, but it does turn freely. Okay, we'll do that with the next tire. Okay, and then what you can do is put the hubcaps on. Once you're content with how easily those tires turn. There we go. Nice and easy. And look at that, those just snap in like that. It's pretty amazing. Now if we look at the back pieces, same thing applies. We have this hole here, and if I push those in, you see we have the tires. We don't need the screws on the outside of those, so they just pop on like this. And they're just friction fit in. Again, incredible job with the tolerances. So now we have our front wheels and our back wheels. Now's a good time to just turn each one of those back wheels nice and slowly, just to lubricate all those gears inside the gearbox before we turn them on super fast. This is the TPU treads. So if you don't have TPU, or if you haven't printed with TPU before, it can be a little finicky. I'm using the AMS TPU from Bamboo Lab. It prints it off really nicely overall, but it is a bit stiffer than some of the other TPU that I've used in the past. So if you put it on the back tire, you just rotate the front tire a little bit, and then it seats in. So there are our treads. Next step, we start talking about some of the electronics. So in this case, we have the receiver module, and we have an LED bar. This is individually addressable LEDs. So first we plug that in there, and then to the receiver bar, we plug this in to the side. It's really important to get all those connections to the right spot. Otherwise, you're going to find that the controller, when you hook that up, that things don't function quite the way they should. Okay, now we have the left motor and the right motor. So first, starting with the left motor, plugs into this port, and the right motor crosses over to the other side and plugs into this port. The open terminals are up, and then the latching piece, the sort of the part that latches in, is at the bottom. But it's just a little bit easier to see that. So they go in there like that. If they aren't going in easy, you probably have it upside down. So if that works there. There we go. Okay. So again, key thing to know, that's backwards on the motors. The left goes into the right, and the right goes into the left. Okay, so looks like we can seat that down in there, and then go ahead and fasten it with a couple of bolts. Sometimes it takes just a little extra pressure to get those bolts to start threading in. Now see, if you're having troubles with that getting in there and you're afraid that you might be breaking it, you can take a 2.5 tap like this and just thread that using the tap instead of the bolt. And you don't have to go all the way, just get it started. And then you'll find that putting in that bolt is just a bit easier. Okay, so there is the receiver module. Next up is the power. So in this case, you'll see that there's a little gap between the yellow and the white, that little white standoff there. That's where we're going to insert that power switch into. And then you can see on the top, you can align that hole just right. And that's where we'll put the next bolt. Okay. Now the off position on the power supply is towards the front of the forklift. So I would recommend going ahead and not setting it to this position, but instead pushing it to the front so it's off, just so that the unit doesn't power up until you're ready for it to. Next, we have a couple of screws that are going to go in the back here. Now, if you're ever using one of these kits and they're telling you to put in a screw, but it's not holding anything together, that's normal because in a lot of these kits, they're using the screw as a magnet point, so they can put magnets in other pieces, and then those screws actually hold together a cover or something with a magnet attached. Now, a key thing to know about this particular ask to put a screw through that hole there is that the layer lines are running lengthwise. And whenever you have layer lines running lengthwise as opposed to widthwise across a hole, you've really increased the chance of a split. If a 3D print is ever going to split, it often splits along the layer lines like this. So if I were to start putting a bolt into this hole here, I would suspect there's a chance that bolt is going to pull apart that layer line and cause a break. And in fact, I did that earlier with a different piece, and I actually had to super glue it back together. So if it does break on you, you can super glue it back together and put the bolt back in there. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to take our M2.5 drill here and just bore out that hole just to make sure that we don't put too much pressure on it. And then I can take the M2.5 tap and I could pre-tap that hole in a way that doesn't build up that pressure against the layer lines and cause a split. If you end up splitting yours, no big deal, just super glue it and let it dry, and then try to do it again. That'll work just fine. Next up, we have the LED lights. Here I've already fished those through there. You just push them through the channel. You have one on the left and one on the right, and you angle those out. Be very careful with them not to pull or push too much on the ends. Pretty fragile. I did not print off the two covers for the lights. Unfortunately, I didn't have any clear PETG, but I think they'll work just fine without it. The next up is we need to just thread those wires through this piece here. Okay, so let's do this. There's one, there's two. Okay, and it looks like that sort of seats in there like that. Again, just trying to keep track of which is on the right, which is on the left. Maybe I'll just wrap that around like that for right now so I can keep track of it. And then the next thing is we put a bolt through this hole in the back. There we go. Next up, we connect our LEDs up to this LED board. So it looks like the LED board is going to fit in like this. And if we match the orientation, it looks like the LED on the left goes into slot 2, and I suspect that means that the LED on the right goes into slot 1. Okay, so those do line up appropriately. So again, these are only going to go in one way. They do recommend using tweezers to put these in. If you do that, just be very careful not to squeeze the wires. The wires are quite delicate. Might take a little bit of trial and error to get it in. Okay, so here this is a bit of a tricky spot. I guess this just goes in here for right now. So the LED lights, you want to point them forward towards the front of the forklift like this. And then you'll notice that there are little slots in this white part. And then there's a little slot in the yellow part here. You want to line those up. And then this piece just clips in, kind of like a seat belt. So you can see how that goes in there. Now I think I forgot the step for screwing this in. So I'm going to go ahead and screw that in. Okay, now like we said, make sure all the LED wires and things are out of the way so that you don't pinch those. What was the motor, not wires? There we go. You just push it all the way down until it's seated like that. Next up, we're going to assemble the front fork assembly. And one key thing to know there is that there's two different types of servos that came with the Cyberbrick kit. One servo is a regular servo, just says 9-gram servo motor. The other servo is a 360-degree servo. We want to use the 360-degree servo. So make sure that's the one you're using in the next few steps. I'm going to take these two pieces and click them together. This is just a friction fit piece. If you have trouble getting those in there, this is a good time to use the needle nose or another pliers just to get that seated fully. So I'm going to get that to where there's no gap in there. Okay. Next up, we will take our servo motor. The servo does come with some screws for tapping. So you can put those in there, and then you'll need to use your Phillips head screwdriver to get those in there. Next up, we will take our longer assembly arm and we slide that in from the servo side down. It slides in just like that. From there, in your servo kit, you will find a servo arm that looks like this. What we're going to do is we're going to take our cutter and we're going to cut that very first hole off. So if I do that on both sides, and then you take the gear with a slot in it and you just push that together, and then you end up with that little plastic piece wedged into that gear. Okay, next thing, we go ahead and mount that on top of the servo. You can press fit that in there. And then again, the servo kit came with a small screw. You can use that and go ahead and use that Phillips head screw to attach that gear to the servo. Okay, so there's the completed servo install. We have the other gear here that we meshed together, and for this we do use a normal M2.5 that we've been using the rest of the kit, and our M1.5 hex bit. Go ahead and tighten that gear down. Now this gear we want to have loose but not too loose to where it wobbles. So I tighten it up and then I loosen back just a little bit to where it's free to turn but not wobble. Alright, next up we're going to install several screws throughout the assembly here. we have a screw that goes in here, these two holes, as well as these two holes down here. Now again, as I mentioned earlier, these are going against layer lines. So when we put something against a layer line, I almost always use my M2.5 drill bit and just make sure that there's no external forces. So I'm going to go ahead and install those. Okay, so for each one of these, make sure that those are not going to strip out break the layer lines. And on this here, you just tighten it up to where it stops. We're going to put some thread through that in a minute. Same with the other side, we're just using that as an anchor point for thread to route through. Leave a little gap in there so that we can run some thread through it. Same with the other side. And then leave a little gap on the screws here at the bottom as well. Just a little visible gap there, maybe about the size of the head of the screw of the bolt. Next up is some nylon thread. So we open up this and it says to do about 30 centimeters long. You do not need to be exact with that. Basically that equates to 3 wraps of this. 1, 2, 3. And then I'll cut another strip. 1, 2, 3. And it says to tie a knot at the very end of each piece of thread. So we'll do that like so for thread number 1, and then we'll do that for thread number 2. There we go. It looks like that part with the knot goes there, and then we're going to actually thread the other side through this slot here, pull it out the other end, and then we wrap that around the bottom and then back up around this bolt. And if I can manage to get it on the inside without binding that other thread there, that's how it unfolds. And that's where you see we had plenty of extra thread on here. And then we can tighten the rope, just hand tighten, and then we can tighten this bolt to hold the rope in place. Okay. And we'll repeat with the other rope. So if we go through here and then around the back side through the front, then we go down the front and back up and around this bolt. It's a little tricky to get that wrapped around the bolt. I think if maybe we loosen it up just a little bit, it'll be easier to get underneath the head of that bolt. There we go. Okay, and then we can go ahead and tighten that bolt up. If you tighten too much, you might tear the thread, but that's now both sides assembled. And then what we can do is use our flush cutter to clip off the extra thread. Now we do the front fork assembly. So if we look at the assembly here, we don't use the back side of it, we use this side here. And then it looks like the forklift tines go through like that, and then they can snap in just like that. Then it asks us to, again, orienting the set like this. Then this has these little hooks on either side of that forklift trolley, and those just snap in to either side of the lift assembly. And it says to push the fork all the way down, and then those wires that we had earlier we will actually take the wire that's running up to this bolt here, and we're going to run that through this little channel, just like that. Same with the other side. And then it says to use a little bit of super glue to keep those together. So with super glue, I always put something on the table to protect the table. And then we just do a little dab of super glue in each side, just to hold that cable in place. Again, make sure you have that forklift assembly all the way to the bottom, and then we'll let that super glue dry. Okay, so the front fork attaches and runs through the hole here. So if I take this front fork assembly that we just finished, and I take the servo piece, I just run that through this front, up and over that LED junction, and run it the rest of the way through. And then I could take this front fork assembly, and you can see how there's a hook on the front of the vehicle and a hole in the fork assembly. You can just slide those together like that. And then we'll end up holding that on underneath with a couple of bolts. So put those in there. 1 and 2. There we go. 2 bolts in the bottom. And now our fork assembly is locked on there. And lastly, we have a piece that I think is for preventing the forklift from tipping too far forward with a heavy lift. So we can put that on there as well. This helps to have 3 hands for, but we'll get it in there. So it just screws onto the bottom. Nothing fancy. Again, I think that just keeps the forklift from tipping forward. Okay. Next up, we connect our servo. So the yellow wire goes to the back right spot of our control board. Okay, next up, we're going to route the power wire around. So we'll plug one part of the wire into here, into the front of our circuit, and then it says to route the other wire down and around the back underneath this kit, underneath this piece of the kit right here. Okay. And then we're going to plug that into this side of the harness. Okay. Next up, looks like we're going to assemble some of the cab. So we start with making sure that these little slots are on the interior sides of the cab. Then we take our back piece here and make, look at that, they even designed into where you can't click that in the wrong way. Friction fit is just amazing, where things just go together. You don't even have to have glue on them. Okay, then we put the top piece in. This one we will use a little bit of glue. Looks like this piece with the bump goes towards this side. Okay. And we'll put a little bit of glue on those pieces. Okay, and we'll hold that together. Next up, it looks like we install this onto the top of our structure here. It just slots in there so on the back, and then the front. See how that just clips around that light bar up there on each side. Okay. Next up, we have our electronics cover. So this cover is going to go over that centerpiece there. You'll notice they're asking us to put a couple of magnets using super glue into those 2 holes. Those 2 holes are going to line up with those 2 bolts that we put in there earlier. And that's actually how the cover stays attached. So we'll go ahead and put those magnets in there and glue those in. Okay. There's the 2 magnets installed. And then we'll do a little bit more gluing. We're going to take this back shell and this piece here, and install them into here. So we're going to take this like this, and then this like this. Put a little bit of glue on that. So put those, we'll glue those in that. Okay, so now we have those glued in there. Nice and tight, nice and snug. Okay, next up, we'll install some magnets, which I already did that while we were off camera there. So you see the magnets in there. As I mentioned earlier, it's very cool how they use just screws and magnets to keep pieces attached. All the glue is dry, so we go ahead and install the battery. So it says to turn the battery this way and then have the wires run underneath this cavity here. And again, make sure that switch is forward before plugging the battery in. So the battery just goes like that. And then if all works well, this back cover can then just slip right in. Then we can do a little bit of cable management and push some of these wires down here like this, and then we can place the cover on top. And there you have it, our completed forklift. Now the only problem is we can't do anything with this until we make a controller, so stay tuned for that. If you liked the video, please don't forget to click the like button. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you can see us put that controller together next. Have a great day, and God bless.